The bridge groaned under the weight of the loaded trucks. Steel cables trembled as the evening wind howled through the city. Then, without warning, the sickening sound of snapping metal echoed through the air. A deafening crack. The bridge jerked violently, throwing pedestrians off their feet. Screams filled the atmosphere as vehicles skidded and swerved, teetering dangerously near the edge. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. A bus, packed with workers returning home, lurched forward, its front wheels hanging over the abyss. Below, the dark river churned, waiting like a hungry beast. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The bridge held. No collapse, no disaster. But the near tragedy was undeniable. If the final inspection had been just a day later, hundreds of lives would have been lost. The crowd stood in stunned silence, staring at the massive cracks now visible in the steel structure. Had someone predicted this? How had such a catastrophe been avoided at the last moment? And more importantly, who had tried to cover up the warning signs? It started as just another routine inspection. Marcus Thompson, a seasoned safety engineer, stood at the foot of the old bridge, his clipboard tucked under one arm. He had seen many structures in worse condition, but something about this one unsettled him. The funding for bridge maintenance had been delayed for years, and rumors of corruption swirled around the project managers. "Something's not right," Marcus muttered to his assistant, Rachel. "Let's check the main support beams." They walked along the pedestrian path, their boots clicking against the concrete. Marcus ran his hand along the railing and frowned. Tiny fractures lined the surface. The cracks looked small, almost harmless, but he knew better. They continued their inspection, tapping the steel columns with their tools. A deep, hollow clang rang out. Marcus paused. That sound was wrong. He struck the beam again. Another hollow clang. A sinking feeling formed in his gut. The metal inside had corroded far worse than the reports had indicated. "Rachel, get the scanner. I need to see inside this thing." Rachel rushed to the van and retrieved the ultrasound device. When she returned, Marcus ran the scanner along the beam. The screen flashed red. The readings showed significant internal rust, so much that the bridge's core structure had been compromised. His heart pounded. This bridge wasn't just in bad shape, it was on the verge of collapse. "We have to report this immediately," Rachel said, her voice shaking. Marcus nodded. "Let's take this to the city safety board. They'll have to shut it down for repairs." But the moment they submitted their findings, trouble began. A week passed, then another. No action was taken. The city officials dismissed their concerns, claiming the report was exaggerated. Emails went unanswered. Calls were ignored. Marcus knew what this meant. Someone was hiding the truth. Digging deeper, he uncovered something chilling. The bridge maintenance contract had been awarded to a company notorious for cutting corners. Worse still, Marcus discovered that several past reports had been altered to downplay structural weaknesses. It was a conspiracy, one that put thousands of lives at risk. With Rachel's help, Marcus compiled the unedited reports and drafted a formal request for an emergency shutdown of the bridge. They sent it to the city's Department of Infrastructure, the media, and even the governor's office. Days passed. Silence. Then, Marcus received a single message on his phone. "Stop, or you'll regret it." Someone was watching them. The next day, Marcus noticed a black SUV parked near his house. At first, he thought it was a coincidence. But when he saw the same vehicle following him to work, he knew he was being threatened. Late one night, while working on a final report, Marcus heard a noise outside. Footsteps. He peeked through the blinds. Two men in dark jackets stood near his car. One reached into his pocket. Something metallic glinted under the streetlight. Marcus's blood ran cold. He turned to Rachel, who was still typing. "We need to leave. Now." Rachel looked up, confused. "What? Why?" Marcus grabbed his laptop and motioned for her to follow. "We're in danger. They don't want this information getting out." As they slipped out the back door, a sudden explosion shook the ground. Fire erupted from the parking lot. Marcus's car was engulfed in flames. Rachel gasped. "That was meant for us." Marcus clenched his fists. "They're willing to kill to keep this quiet." But he refused to back down. With the evidence in hand, he and Rachel raced to the nearest news station, desperate to expose the truth before it was too late. The night before the near collapse, Marcus managed to get a news anchor to air the story. The public outcry was immediate. The mayor had no choice but to order a final emergency inspection, scheduled for the next morning. That morning, as engineers arrived to inspect the bridge, they found exactly what Marcus had feared. Cracks had grown worse overnight. The bridge was seconds away from disaster. And then, just hours later, it happened. The terrible groan. The sickening snap. But thanks to the investigation, the area had been partially cleared, reducing casualties. Still, the damage was undeniable. Now, as Marcus stood staring at the fractured steel, he knew the fight wasn't over. Someone had tried to bury the truth. Someone had risked hundreds of lives for profit. And Marcus was going to find out who. The air was thick with the scent of burnt rubber and dust. Emergency sirens blared as firefighters and rescue teams rushed to stabilize the damaged bridge. Marcus stood frozen, his heart pounding. He had spent weeks trying to prevent this disaster. Yet here he was, watching the aftermath of a catastrophe that could have been much worse. Rachel grabbed his arm. "We need to get to the city officials. Someone has to answer for this." Marcus clenched his fists. "No. First, we need to find out who's behind this cover-up. Someone tampered with the safety reports. Someone ignored the warnings." Before Rachel could respond, a uniformed officer approached them. His expression was unreadable. "Mr. Thompson? Miss Carter?" Marcus nodded cautiously. "Yes. The mayor wants to see you. Now." Rachel and Marcus exchanged a glance. The mayor had been silent for weeks, refusing to acknowledge their reports. Why was he suddenly interested now? Inside City Hall, the tension was suffocating. Mayor Douglas sat behind his massive desk, his fingers steepled together. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, his graying hair neatly combed back. Behind him, a large window overlooked the ruined bridge. Marcus wasted no time. "People almost died today because of negligence. You ignored our warnings." "Why?" The mayor sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mr. Thompson, do you think I wanted this to happen? I was pressured by forces much bigger than me." Rachel crossed her arms. "Who pressured you?" The mayor hesitated. Then he leaned forward. "Do you know who owns the construction company responsible for the bridge maintenance?" Marcus shook his head. "William Carter." Rachel's face went pale. "Carter? As in Carter Industries?" "Yes," the mayor said gravely. "One of the most powerful businessmen in the city." Marcus exhaled sharply. William Carter was notorious for his deep political connections. He controlled multiple city contracts, including road repairs, real estate developments, and public works. Rachel narrowed her eyes. "So you're saying the bridge was left in this condition because Carter didn't want to lose money?" Mayor Douglas leaned back. "It's more than that. Carter Industries falsified safety reports, bribed officials, and even threatened inspectors. Anyone who tried to speak up was silenced." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Silenced? You mean?" The mayor's eyes darkened. "Two engineers who previously raised concerns about the bridge disappeared last year. The case was ruled as accidental drownings." "But I don't believe that." Rachel swallowed hard. "So why are you telling us all this now?" The mayor's lips pressed into a thin line. "Because now the public knows something went wrong. And I know Carter will do anything to cover this up, including getting rid of you too." A heavy silence filled the room. Then the mayor's assistant rushed in, breathless. "Sir, William Carter just arrived downstairs. He wants to speak with you." The mayor's face hardened. "He's here already?" Marcus and Rachel tensed. They had just uncovered the man responsible for the cover-up, and now he was in the same building. "We need to leave," Rachel whispered. "Now." They slipped out of the mayor's office through a side door, but as they reached the hallway, Marcus spotted two men in suits standing by the exit. "Security?" Rachel asked. Marcus shook his head. "No, Carter's men." They turned back, searching for another way out. But just as they reached the stairwell, a deep voice stopped them. "Going somewhere?" William Carter stood at the end of the hall, his expression unreadable. He was a tall, imposing man in his 60s, dressed in an expensive charcoal suit. His cold blue eyes locked onto Marcus. Rachel took a step back. "Mr. Carter." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You two have been very busy, digging where you shouldn't be." Marcus clenched his fists. "People nearly died today because of your greed." Carter let out a slow, deliberate chuckle. "Is that what you think? That this was just about money?" He took a step closer. "You have no idea how things work, do you?" Rachel's voice was firm. "We know enough, and we have proof." For the first time, Carter's expression shifted slightly, just a flicker of concern. Proof? Marcus nodded. Original safety reports, emails, financial records. It's all in a secure location. Carter's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. Marcus refused to back down. No, you did. And now the truth is coming out. Carter exhaled sharply. Let's talk somewhere private. Rachel scoffed. So we can end up like those other inspectors who accidentally drowned? No thanks. For the first time, Carter's calm demeanor cracked. His lips pressed into a thin line. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the front of the building. Gunshots. The hallway erupted into chaos as people screamed and scattered. Security guards rushed to contain the situation, but Carter's men moved fast, pulling him back toward the stairwell. Marcus grabbed Rachel's hand. Run! They sprinted through the hallway, dodging the panicked crowd. As they reached the emergency exit, Marcus risked a glance back. Carter was gone. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Marcus and Rachel burst through the emergency exit into the cool night air. Their breaths came in sharp gasps as they sprinted down the dimly lit alley behind City Hall. Sirens blared in the distance, and the sound of shouting echoed through the streets. Rachel glanced over her shoulder. Do you think Carter's men are following us? Marcus didn't slow down. I don't know, and I don't want to find out. They darted into a side street and pressed themselves against the brick wall of an old warehouse. Marcus peeked around the corner. The entrance to City Hall was swarming with police officers, but there was no sign of Carter or his men. Rachel wiped sweat from her forehead. This is bad. He knows we have evidence. And now he's going to come after us. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. We have to move fast. If we can get this information to the right people, we can expose him before he has a chance to bury it. Rachel nodded. But where do we go? Marcus hesitated for only a moment. We need to find someone we can trust. Rachel frowned. Do we know anyone like that? Marcus's mind raced. Then he thought of someone, a journalist named Daniel Reyes. He's been investigating corruption in the city for years, Marcus said. If anyone can help us get the truth out, it's him. Rachel's expression was doubtful. You really think he'll take on someone as powerful as Carter? Marcus met her gaze. He's the only chance we have. The streets were quieter now, but Marcus could feel the tension in the air. Something about the city felt different. It wasn't just the near collapse of the bridge. It was the way people looked over their shoulders, the way certain streets seemed too empty, the way whispers of fear filled the spaces where conversations used to be. William Carter wasn't just a businessman. He was a force that ruled the city from the shadows. Rachel sighed. I hate this feeling, like we're being watched. Marcus gave her a grim look. We probably are. They made their way toward a small diner on the outskirts of the city. It was nearly midnight by the time they arrived. The neon sign flickered above the entrance, casting an eerie blue glow over the sidewalk. Rachel hesitated at the door. Are you sure about this? Marcus nodded. We don't have a choice. Inside, the diner was almost empty except for a lone man sitting in a corner booth. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a worn leather jacket and thick-rimmed glasses. His laptop sat open in front of him, the screen casting a pale glow over his sharp features. Daniel Reyes. Marcus and Rachel slid into the booth across from him. Daniel didn't look up right away. I saw the news about the bridge, he said, his voice calm but laced with curiosity. You were right about the structural failures. The city barely avoided a catastrophe. Marcus leaned forward. We have proof that Carter Industries covered it up. We need your help to expose him. Daniel finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. Carter is dangerous. Rachel crossed her arms. We know. That's why we need you. Daniel exhaled. I've been digging into Carter's dealings for years. The man owns half the city. Mayors, police chiefs, judges, they all owe him favors. If you go up against him, you'd better be prepared for a war. Marcus's jaw tightened. We don't have a choice. He already tried to silence us once. Daniel studied them for a moment, then nodded. Okay, show me what you've got. Marcus pulled out a flash drive and slid it across the table. This has everything: altered safety reports, financial records, even internal emails from Carter's company admitting to the risks. Daniel plugged it into his laptop. His expression darkened as he scrolled through the files. This is bad, he muttered. If this gets out, Carter won't just lose contracts. He could go to prison. Rachel tapped the table impatiently. So what do we do? Daniel glanced up. We go public, but we have to be smart about it. If Carter knows what we're doing, he'll try to stop us before the story breaks. Marcus nodded. Then we don't give him the chance. But just as he said those words, the diner's door creaked open. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, and he was looking right at them. Rachel's fingers curled around her coffee mug. Do you think he's one of Carter's men? Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he discreetly closed his laptop and slipped the flash drive into his pocket. Marcus kept his voice low. We need to leave. Now. But before they could move, the man approached their table. He was tall, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that carried no warmth. He leaned in slightly. Mr. Thompson, he said in a smooth, controlled voice. Mr. Carter would like a word. Rachel's grip tightened on her mug. We're busy. The man's lips curled into a small smile. That wasn't a request. Marcus's heart pounded. He knew if they left with this man, they might not come back. Daniel spoke suddenly. I wouldn't do that if I were you. The man raised an eyebrow. Oh, Daniel lifted his phone, turning the screen toward him. I've been recording this entire conversation. If anything happens to us, the world will know exactly who was behind it. The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the diner. Rachel let out a shaky breath. That was too close. Marcus looked at Daniel. We need to release the story. Tonight. Daniel nodded. I'll write it up, but we'll need a bigger platform. If we post this on a small blog, Carter will have it erased before anyone sees it. Marcus thought for a moment. What about the national news? Daniel smirked. Now you're thinking big. Rachel exhaled. But that means we only have one shot. Daniel's expression grew serious. Then let's make it count. They left the diner separately to avoid suspicion. Marcus and Rachel drove to a safe house, an old apartment Daniel had set up for whistleblowers. As they settled in, Rachel stared at the city skyline. Do you think we'll win? Marcus sighed. I don't know, but I do know one thing. She turned to face him. What? Marcus's eyes were filled with determination. Carter won't stop until he's destroyed everything in his way. He clenched his fists. And neither will we. But outside, in the darkness, a black SUV sat parked across the street. Watching. Waiting. This fight was far from over. The air inside the safe house was thick with tension. The small apartment was barely furnished. Just a couch, a table, and an old TV flickering with the late-night news. Rachel sat by the window, nervously peeking through the curtains. They're still out there, she whispered. Marcus paced the room. They won't make a move yet. Carter knows we have evidence, but he doesn't know how we plan to use it. Daniel was at the tiny desk, typing furiously on his laptop. I just sent the files to my contact at the National Post. If they run the story, it'll be everywhere by morning. Rachel exhaled sharply. And if they don't? Daniel didn't look up. Then we find another way. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. We need a backup plan. Something Carter won't see coming. Rachel hesitated. What if we go live? A video statement. Social media. If we tell the world ourselves, Carter won't have time to stop it. Daniel frowned. That's risky. If we go public before a major outlet picks up the story, Carter might try to discredit us or worse. Marcus thought for a moment. We wait until the National Post confirms they'll run it. If they stall, we do it ourselves. Daniel nodded. Agreed. But before anyone could say another word, the power went out. The room was plunged into darkness. A second later, Rachel gasped. The SUV, it's gone. Then came the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the hallway. Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed Rachel's arm and pulled her toward the back door. Daniel shoved his laptop into his bag and followed. The footsteps grew louder. They cut the power on purpose, Daniel whispered. They want us blind. Rachel's hands trembled as she fumbled with the lock. Hurry! A sudden bang echoed through the apartment as the front door burst open. Marcus yanked the back door open just as a flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Go, go, go! They sprinted into the alleyway, their hearts pounding. The cold night air hit their faces as they ran toward Daniel's car, parked a block away. Rachel looked back. They're coming. Dark figures rushed out of the apartment, their silhouettes barely visible under the dim streetlights. Daniel unlocked the car with a beep. Get in! They dove inside, and Daniel hit the gas. Tires screeched against the pavement as they sped off into the night. Marcus turned to look out the back window. The men stood in the alley watching them go. No chase, no gunfire, just silence. Rachel's breath was ragged. Why didn't they follow us? Marcus's stomach twisted. Because they don't need to. Daniel gripped the steering wheel. What do you mean? Marcus's voice was grim. Carter doesn't chase. He corners. They drove in silence for miles, heading toward the outskirts of the city. Daniel finally pulled over near an abandoned rest stop. Rachel hugged herself, still shaken. They knew exactly where we were. How? Daniel pulled out his laptop and began typing furiously. They must have tracked one of our devices. Phones, maybe even the car. Marcus took out his phone. Then we get rid of them. Without hesitation, he opened the car door and smashed his phone against the pavement. Rachel and Daniel did the same. Daniel sighed. That'll buy us some time. But if Carter really wants to find us, he will. Marcus nodded. Then we can't stay in one place for long. Rachel shivered. I don't get it. Carter has all the power. Why is he so afraid of this story? Daniel leaned back, rubbing his temples. Because if the public finds out the truth, he loses everything. This isn't just about a bridge collapse. It's about corruption, money, murder. If the right people start digging, Carter's empire crumbles. Marcus clenched his fists. Then we make sure that happens. Daniel's laptop dinged. He quickly checked the screen. His eyes widened. They're running the story. Rachel sat up. Wait, the National Post? Daniel nodded. It just went live. The emails, the safety reports, the bribery, everything. It's out there for the world to see. For a brief moment, relief washed over them. Then Marcus's phone, his spare burner phone, buzzed. A single message appeared on the screen. You think this is over? Think again. Marcus's blood ran cold. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. What do we do now? Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. We finish this. But in the distance, a pair of headlights appeared, and they were coming straight for them. The headlights grew brighter, cutting through the darkness like sharp knives. The engine's roar echoed through the empty rest stop, growing louder with every passing second. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. They found us. Marcus didn't waste a second. Drive! Daniel slammed the gas pedal. Tires screeched as the car spun onto the highway, the pursuing vehicle close behind. Rachel twisted in her seat, watching as the black SUV closed the gap. The driver's face was hidden behind the tinted windshield, but she didn't need to see him to know who had sent him. William Carter never made empty threats. The SUV suddenly swerved right, trying to cut them off. Hang on! Daniel yanked the wheel left, barely avoiding the collision. The car fishtailed before Daniel regained control. They're trying to force us off the road, Rachel cried. Marcus scanned their surroundings. The highway stretched ahead, empty except for their two vehicles. On the right, a steep hill dropped into a dark forest. On the left, a concrete divider separated them from oncoming traffic. They were trapped. The SUV surged forward, bumping the back of their car. Marcus grabbed the dashboard. We can't outrun them forever. Daniel gritted his teeth. Then we need to outsmart them. The SUV rammed them again, harder this time. The car skidded, nearly spinning out. Rachel let out a panicked gasp. We're gonna crash. Marcus's mind raced. They needed to get off the road. But how? Then he saw it. A narrow service road, barely visible in the darkness, cut off from the highway by a broken fence. Turn there, Marcus shouted. Daniel's eyes flicked toward the opening. Are you crazy? That leads into the woods. It's our only shot. The SUV sped up, preparing for another hit. Daniel swerved hard to the right, the tires barely gripping the asphalt as the car shot toward the service road. The SUV was caught off guard, missing the turn by inches. It screeched to a stop before reversing, trying to follow. But by then, they were gone. The service road was rough, filled with potholes and loose gravel. Trees loomed on either side, their branches stretching overhead like skeletal fingers. Rachel's hands shook. Where does this even go? No idea, Marcus admitted. But it bought us time. Daniel slowed the car, keeping his eyes on the rearview mirror. The SUV hadn't appeared yet. Marcus exhaled. I think we lost them. But just as the words left his mouth, another pair of headlights flickered through the trees. A second SUV. Rachel's voice was laced with fear. They knew we'd come this way. Marcus's stomach dropped. Carter had planned for this. The second SUV accelerated, its tires kicking up dirt as it tore down the road toward them. Daniel tightened his grip on the wheel. "Hold on." He floored it. The two cars raced through the woods, the narrow road barely wide enough for them. Branches scraped against the sides of the vehicle. Rocks and dirt flew in every direction. The SUV behind them was gaining. "They're too fast," Rachel yelled. Marcus's eyes darted across the terrain. Then he saw it. A sharp bend ahead, with a deep ravine just beyond it. If they missed the turn, they were dead. "Daniel!" Marcus shouted. "Slow down before the turn." But before Daniel could react, the SUV behind them made its move. It rammed them hard. The car spun out of control. Rachel screamed. Marcus grabbed onto the door as the car skidded sideways, sliding toward the edge of the ravine. The tires screeched. The front of the car tilted downward. For a terrifying moment, it felt like they were going over. But at the last second, Daniel yanked the wheel. The car jolted back onto the road, barely avoiding the drop. The SUV behind them wasn't as lucky. With too much speed and no room to correct, it veered off course, barreling straight toward the ravine. There was a deafening crash. Then silence. Rachel turned in her seat, her face pale. "Did they?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. The wreckage was already vanishing into the darkness below. Daniel let out a shaky breath. "We need to keep moving." Marcus nodded. "Carter won't stop. Not until we stop him first." But deep down, he knew one thing. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The car bounced over the uneven road, the aftermath of the chase still weighing heavily on them. The air inside the vehicle was thick with exhaustion and fear. Rachel clutched the door handle, her knuckles white. "That was too close," she muttered. Marcus turned to Daniel. "How far are we from the city?" Daniel checked the GPS on his laptop. "About an hour, if we don't run into trouble." Rachel scoffed. "Trouble is all we've run into." Marcus looked back toward the ravine where the second SUV had disappeared. He wanted to believe it was over, that Carter's men were finally out of their way. But he knew better. Carter wouldn't stop until they were silenced. Permanently. Marcus turned his gaze forward. "We need a plan." Daniel pulled onto a back road, driving slowly to avoid drawing attention. The glow of the city skyline was visible in the distance, like a beacon leading them home. Rachel sighed. "So, the story's out. But what now? Carter still has power. He still has people." Marcus rubbed his temples. "We need to take him down completely. Not just his company, him." Daniel frowned. "That's easier said than done. He's got lawyers, politicians, and cops in his pocket. Even with the story out, he'll spin it in his favor." Marcus's jaw clenched. "Then we make it impossible for him to escape." Rachel gave him a wary look. "You're thinking of something dangerous, aren't you?" Marcus nodded. "We need to expose him on a level he can't control. Public setting. One where he can't silence the truth." Daniel's eyebrows furrowed. "You mean live?" Marcus's eyes burned with determination. "Exactly. A press conference. But not just any press conference. We hijack one of his." Rachel's eyes widened. "That's insane." Marcus nodded. "But it's the only way." Daniel exhaled. "You realize that if this goes wrong, we're dead, right?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "We're dead if we do nothing." Rachel crossed her arms. "Okay, genius. How do we even get near him?" "Carter's not exactly walking the streets alone." Marcus smirked. "He's hosting a charity gala tomorrow. All the city's elite will be there, including the press." Daniel leaned back thinking. "Security will be tight. We'll need a way in." Rachel hesitated. "And if Carter sees us?" Marcus's expression darkened. "Then we make sure he can't run." The next night, Marcus, Rachel, and Daniel arrived near the gala's venue, an extravagant hotel in the heart of the city. The streets were filled with luxury cars, reporters, and high-profile guests. Marcus adjusted his stolen security badge. "Everyone remember the plan?" Rachel tugged on her elegant gown, a look of discomfort on her face. "I sneak in as a guest, blend in, and record everything." Daniel, dressed in a suit, held a small earpiece. "I hack the sound system and get our evidence playing over the speakers." Marcus adjusted his suit. "And I make sure Carter doesn't leave." Rachel exhaled. "This is either going to be brilliant or get us all killed." Marcus forced a smile. "Let's hope for the first one." They split up. Rachel wove through the crowd, flashing a fake invitation at the door. Daniel slipped around the back, finding an access panel for the building's sound system. Marcus walked in through the staff entrance, the stolen badge clipped to his shirt. He passed a few guards, keeping his head down. Inside, the gala was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the scent of expensive champagne filled the air. Guests laughed and chatted, unaware that the event was about to turn into a war zone. Then, at the far end of the ballroom, Marcus saw him. William Carter, smiling, laughing, acting like he hadn't just tried to kill them. Marcus's fists clenched. Not for long. Rachel positioned herself near the stage, her phone discreetly recording. Daniel's voice crackled through the earpiece. "I'm in. Audio is ready to go." Marcus stood near the exit, watching Carter closely. The man was shaking hands with city officials, putting on the perfect act. Marcus pressed his earpiece. "On my signal." Carter stepped onto the stage, smiling at the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming." Marcus gave the order. Suddenly, the ballroom speakers crackled to life. Then Carter's own voice filled the room. "We need to shut them up. Make it look like an accident." The crowd murmured in confusion. Then, "I don't care what it takes. That bridge should have collapsed by now." Gasps spread through the room. Guests turned to Carter, eyes wide with shock. Carter's face paled. "What is this? Turn it off." But Daniel had locked the system. The recording continued. "If anyone talks, we bury them. Understand?" Chaos erupted. Reporters grabbed their microphones. Security rushed forward. Carter turned, panic flashing in his eyes. Then he saw Marcus. Marcus smirked. "Game over." Carter bolted for the exit. Marcus was faster. He grabbed Carter by the collar and slammed him against a pillar. "Going somewhere?" Carter struggled. "You think this changes anything?" Marcus tightened his grip. "It already has." Then police officers pushed through the crowd. One of them stepped forward, pulling out handcuffs. "William Carter, you're under arrest." Carter's face twisted in rage. "You have nothing on me." Then Rachel appeared, holding up her phone. "Actually, we have everything." The officers dragged Carter away. The cameras flashed. The crowd cheered. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Corruption scandal. Business tycoon William Carter arrested. Rachel leaned back on the motel bed, scrolling through her phone. "We actually did it." Daniel grinned. "Carter's done. He won't be seeing daylight for a long time." Marcus exhaled, staring out the window. They had won. But he knew there were always more Carters out there. More men who thought they were untouchable. Rachel nudged him. "What's next?" Marcus smiled. "We keep fighting." The sun rose over the city, casting a golden glow over the skyline. The morning news played on every television, every radio station, and every social media feed. Breaking news. Business mogul William Carter has been arrested following a shocking exposé revealing his involvement in fraudulent safety reports, bribery, and attempted murder. Marcus sat on the motel balcony, watching the world react. His coffee had gone cold, but he barely noticed. The fight was over, at least the biggest part of it. Rachel stepped outside, her phone in hand. "You've seen this." She showed him the screen. Comments flooded the news posts, some cheering for Carter's downfall, others questioning if more people were involved. Daniel leaned against the doorway. "They're already talking about investigating his company, his business partners, even some of the city officials." Marcus nodded. "Good. It's not just about Carter. The whole system needs to be exposed." Rachel sat next to him. "But we're still not safe, are we?" Marcus sighed. "Not yet." The doorbell rang. All three of them froze. Daniel slowly reached for the motel's security camera feed on his laptop. The screen flickered, showing a grainy image of a man in a suit standing outside their door. Rachel swallowed. "That's not the police, is it?" Marcus shook his head. "Then who is it?" Daniel asked. Marcus stood, his jaw tight. "We're about to find out." Marcus opened the door just enough to see the man's face. The stranger was tall, well-dressed, and carried an air of quiet authority. His sharp blue eyes studied Marcus with interest. "Marcus Hayes?" the man asked. Marcus didn't confirm. "Who's asking?" The man pulled out a badge. "Agent James Calloway, FBI." Rachel and Daniel exchanged nervous glances. Calloway lowered his voice. "I need to speak with you, privately." Marcus hesitated, then stepped outside, closing the door behind him. We already turned over all the evidence. Carter's in custody. What more do you need? Calloway adjusted his tie. You don't understand. Carter was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? Calloway's face was unreadable. What you uncovered was only the surface. Carter's company was laundering money for people a lot more powerful than him. Marcus crossed his arms. And let me guess, those people don't want this information getting out. Calloway nodded. Exactly. The moment Carter was arrested, they started cleaning house, destroying files, eliminating loose ends. He paused. You're a loose end, Mr. Hayes. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Calloway glanced toward the door. You, your friends, you're all in danger. Marcus's fists clenched. We knew this wouldn't end with Carter. Calloway handed him a slip of paper. Meet me here in an hour. I'll explain everything. But be careful. You're being watched. Then, without another word, he walked away. Marcus stood there, heart pounding, watching Calloway disappear into a black SUV. Rachel opened the door slightly. Well, Marcus exhaled. Pack your things. We're not done yet. The meeting spot was a dimly lit parking garage downtown. Cars were parked at odd angles, some covered in dust, as if they hadn't been touched in years. Calloway was already there, leaning against a car, arms crossed. Rachel, Daniel, and Marcus approached cautiously. Daniel whispered, "This feels like a setup." Marcus kept walking. Only one way to find out. Calloway didn't look up. You weren't followed? Marcus glanced behind him. Not that we saw. Calloway pulled out a manila folder and handed it to Marcus. This is what Carter was hiding. The names of everyone involved. Politicians, CEOs, even law enforcement. Rachel peered over Marcus's shoulder. The list was long. Too long. Daniel whispered, "These people, they run this city." Calloway's face was grim. Not just this city. This country. Marcus flipped through the files. If this gets out. Calloway cut him off. If this gets out, people will die. Rachel's eyes widened. So what are you saying? We just let them get away with it? Calloway hesitated. I'm saying you need to be smart about how you handle this. You already shook the hornet's nest with Carter. Now, the people behind him are on high alert. Marcus clenched his jaw. We're not running. Calloway studied him for a moment, then nodded. I didn't think you would. He handed Marcus a flash drive. This has everything. But if you go public, you need a way to protect yourselves. Rachel frowned. And how do we do that? Calloway hesitated before saying, by making sure you're not the only ones holding the truth. Marcus's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Calloway's voice was low. Find a way to spread it, far and wide. Make sure that even if something happens to you, the truth won't die with you. Daniel's mind was already working. A dead man's switch. Calloway nodded. Exactly. Rachel glanced between them. And if we fail? Calloway's expression darkened. Then you won't live long enough to try again. Back at the motel, Marcus stared at the flash drive, turning it over in his fingers. Daniel had already begun working on a plan. I can set up multiple servers, store the data in different locations. If anything happens to us, the files get released automatically. Rachel exhaled. So we make sure the world sees it, no matter what. Marcus nodded. We don't let them silence us. Daniel smirked. Good thing I'm a genius. Rachel rolled her eyes. Humble, too. Marcus stood. We have one shot at this. If we mess up, we're dead. Rachel met his gaze. Then we don't mess up. But deep down, Marcus knew. The real fight was just beginning. The motel room was silent except for the soft hum of Daniel's laptop. Screens filled with code flickered across his monitor as he worked. Rachel paced by the window, peeking through the blinds every few seconds. Marcus sat on the bed, gripping the flash drive. He knew the moment they released the files, they would have a target on their backs. The people on that list weren't just criminals, they were powerful, untouchable figures. But not for much longer. Rachel sighed. How much time do we have? Daniel didn't look up. Hard to say. We've been quiet since Carter's arrest. But they're watching. They're waiting for us to make a move. Marcus clenched his jaw. Then let's not keep them waiting. Daniel's fingers flew over the keyboard. Setting up the dead man's switch now. If anything happens to us, the files go public. News outlets, independent journalists, social media. Once it's out, there's no taking it back. Rachel exhaled. That's a big if. Marcus stood. We'll make sure it happens. Rachel frowned. How? Marcus's eyes darkened. By making ourselves impossible to ignore. 2 days later, the plan was in motion. They had chosen their battleground carefully. A live, televised press event outside City Hall. The mayor was set to speak about restoring public trust after Carter's arrest. Many of the names on the list would be there, pretending to be innocent. Marcus, Rachel, and Daniel stood in the crowd, dressed inconspicuously. Daniel had a tablet in hand, the flash drive plugged in. One button press and the files would be released. Rachel whispered, "You sure about this?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "It's now or never." On the stage, the mayor stepped up to the podium. Cameras flashed. Microphones buzzed. The moment he started speaking, Daniel tapped his screen. Instantly, every television, every phone, every news channel broadcasting the event changed. Not to the mayor's speech, but to Carter's files. The video screens behind the stage lit up with evidence. Emails, bank transfers, voice recordings of bribes and threats. The crowd gasped. Reporters scrambled. Then, the final nail in the coffin. A recording of Carter himself. "They'll never catch us. We own the police, the courts, the government. If anyone tries, we bury them." The crowd erupted in chaos. Shouts, gasps, accusations. Some of the officials on stage immediately bolted. Others tried to deny it, but the evidence spoke for itself. Marcus stepped forward, his voice ringing loud. "This city deserves the truth." Then all hell broke loose. Sirens wailed in the distance. Security officers stormed the crowd, looking for Marcus and his team. Rachel grabbed his arm. "Time to go." They ran. Bullets cracked through the air as someone opened fire. Screams erupted. People scattered. Daniel led them toward a side alley. "We have to split up." Marcus shook his head. "Not happening." Rachel ducked as another shot rang out. "We don't have a choice." A black SUV skidded around the corner, blocking their path. The door opened. Agent Calloway stepped out. "Get in. Now." They didn't hesitate. As soon as they were inside, the SUV tore away from the chaos. Marcus turned to Calloway. "You set us up?" Calloway's grip on the wheel tightened. "No. I just made sure you had an escape plan." Rachel exhaled. "So what now?" Calloway smirked. "Now, we watch them burn." By the time they reached the safe house, the world was on fire. Every news outlet was covering the leaked files. Officials were being arrested. Businesses were collapsing. Even high-ranking police officers were being exposed. There was no coming back from this. Rachel sat on the couch, stunned. "It's really happening." Daniel grinned. "Told you I was a genius." Marcus stared at the screen, watching Carter's empire crumble. For the first time in years, he felt something he had long forgotten. Peace. But as he watched the headlines scroll, he knew there were always more Carters, always more battles to fight, and he wasn't done yet. The city had changed overnight. Every television screen, every newspaper, and every radio station echoed the same story. The largest corruption scandal in decades exposed. The faces of politicians, law enforcement officers, and business moguls flashed across the news, many of them already in handcuffs. Protests erupted outside government buildings. The people had woken up, but so had the monsters hiding in the shadows. Marcus, Rachel, and Daniel sat in a dimly lit safe house, watching the chaos unfold on TV. Daniel smirked. "They're panicking." He pointed at the screen, where footage showed corporate executives being escorted out of offices by federal agents. They thought they were untouchable. Rachel wasn't smiling. She looked out the window, where the streets were flooded with angry citizens. "They're calling for more arrests. Some people want the whole government torn down." Marcus leaned forward, rubbing his hands together. "Good. But it won't be that easy." Rachel frowned. "Why not? We have all the evidence." Marcus exhaled. "Because people like this don't go down quietly." Daniel's phone buzzed. He picked it up, his face darkening. "And we just got proof of that." He turned the screen toward them. A live video played. A news anchor, pale-faced, reported in a shaking voice. A tragic turn of events. Federal agent James Calloway was found dead in his apartment this morning. Authorities suspect suicide. Silence filled the room. Rachel shook her head. "No. No way. Calloway wouldn't." Marcus clenched his fists. "They got to him." Daniel cursed under his breath. "It's starting." The arrests weren't enough. The people behind Carter, the real masterminds, were still out there. And now they were fighting back. In the days that followed, strange things started happening. Key witnesses disappeared. Some were found dead. Others simply vanished. Judges recused themselves from the cases. No reason given. News stations backpedaled. Some started saying the leak was exaggerated, that maybe Marcus and his team had fabricated evidence. The city was in limbo. Half the people were demanding justice. The other half were afraid to believe the truth. Rachel threw a newspaper onto the table. "They're trying to bury this." Daniel shook his head. "No, they're trying to bury us." Marcus looked at his reflection in the dark window. "Then we don't give them the chance." A few nights later, Marcus received a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Hayes," a deep voice said, "you've made quite the mess." Marcus didn't flinch. "Depends on who you ask." The voice chuckled. "I have an offer. Walk away, right now. In return, you and your friends get to live." Marcus leaned against the wall. "And if I say no?" The voice was silent for a moment. Then we clean up the mess. Permanently." Marcus smirked. "Try it." The line went dead. Marcus turned to Rachel and Daniel. "Pack your bags. We just became the most wanted people in the city." Rachel crossed her arms. "So what's the plan?" Marcus exhaled. "We hit back. One last time." Daniel cracked his knuckles. "Now this I can work with." The system was trying to erase everything. They had already taken out Calloway. They were silencing witnesses. But Marcus knew one thing. If they wanted to bury the truth, he had to make sure it never stayed buried. So he reached out to the only people who could help. The people. Anonymous hackers. Journalists. Whistleblowers. Activists. He spread the files deeper than ever before. It wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. It was about making sure no one could ignore it. As protests turned into riots and government buildings locked down, Marcus knew this wasn't over. It was just getting started. The city had finally begun to change. The truth about the corruption, the bribery, and the lies was out for everyone to see. But as the shock faded, a deeper wound opened. A wound born of neglect, injustice, and racism. Behind the headlines of arrests and exposed secrets lay the story of ordinary people who had long been ignored by the powerful. These were the people whose neighborhoods, schools, and even bridges had been treated as if their lives mattered less. Now, in the aftermath of the scandal, their voices were beginning to rise. In one of the poorest parts of the city, the battered remains of an old bridge told a story of neglect. This was not the grand, shiny structure found in wealthier areas, but a bridge that served a community made up mostly of people of color. For years, city officials had turned a blind eye to the crumbling safety measures here. When Marcus and his team first discovered the deep cracks and rust in the bridge's steel beams, they learned a bitter truth. The bridge had not been maintained simply because it lay in a neighborhood deemed unimportant by those in power. Mrs. Johnson, an elderly resident of the area, remembered when the bridge was built. "Back then, we trusted that our city would care for us," she said softly, rocking in her chair outside a small, worn house. "But time and time again, we were forgotten." Her eyes, filled with memories of better days, now reflected sadness and anger. Many families had nearly lost their lives when the bridge showed signs of collapse. A bus filled with local workers, mostly black and brown people, had come too close to disaster. The same community had suffered from neglected schools, unsafe playgrounds, and poorly lit streets. The same corruption that allowed Carter to cut corners was driven by a racist idea that these people were less worthy of protection. Documents that Marcus uncovered later revealed a pattern. Safety reports for projects in wealthy, white neighborhoods showed careful maintenance and regular inspections, while those for minority neighborhoods were full of gaps, missed repairs, and excuses. It was a clear sign that the neglect was not accidental, it was by design. As the news of the scandal spread, community leaders in these neglected neighborhoods began to speak out. At a crowded town hall meeting held in a modest community center, voices that had been silenced for so long filled the room. People stood up one by one, sharing painful memories of times when their lives were treated as less important. "I lost my husband because the hospital was in a safe part of town, and our neighborhood was left to rot," said Mr. Rodriguez, his voice trembling with emotion. His words resonated with many in the room. Another resident, Ms. Lee, recalled a near-tragic accident on the old bridge. "My son was on the bus when the bridge nearly collapsed. We always knew something was wrong, but no one listened until it was almost too late." The community was not just angry, they were determined. They organized peaceful protests, gathered petitions, and demanded that the city take responsibility for the years of neglect. Flyers were printed in many languages, calling for justice and fairness. Children, holding handmade signs with simple words like equal and safe, marched alongside their parents. The scene was both heartbreaking and hopeful. A united community that had finally found its voice. Marcus, Rachel, and Daniel attended one of these meetings. Sitting in the back of the crowded hall, they listened intently as a young activist, Jamal, took the stage. His eyes shone with determination. We are not just statistics. We are people with dreams, families, and lives. Our neighborhoods deserve safe roads, clean schools, and bridges that hold us up, not let us down. His words sparked applause and cheers. For the first time, Marcus felt that the fight was not just about stopping one corrupt man. It was about changing a system that had built in racism from the ground up. Working together with community leaders, Marcus and his team began to gather even more evidence. They talked to residents, collected forgotten records, and recorded testimonies from those who had suffered from the neglect. Every document, every tearful story, painted a clear picture of a system that had long placed profit and prejudice above human life. Rachel met with local parents who described how the unsafe infrastructure affected their children. Our children play near dangerous roads because there is nowhere else to go, a mother explained. We want our kids to be safe, but no one cares about our neighborhood. These personal stories added a raw, human element to the growing pile of evidence. Daniel spent long hours at his computer, setting up secure servers to store the new files. He worked on a plan to ensure that if anything happened to them, the files would be released automatically to independent media and international organizations that could not be silenced by local power. We must protect these voices, he said, his eyes fixed on lines of code that would secure the future of the truth. Local activists organized peaceful marches and rallies. One afternoon, as the sun set over the city, a crowd gathered in front of City Hall. Chanting for equal treatment and safe neighborhoods, they held signs and sang songs of hope. The peaceful protest was a direct challenge to the forces of racism and corruption. Even as counter-protesters and hired thugs tried to disrupt the march, the community's resolve only grew stronger. Marcus addressed the crowd from a makeshift stage in a nearby park. Today, we are not just fighting for one bridge or one scandal, he said in a calm, clear voice. We are fighting for every child, every family, and every community that has been left in the dark by a system that thinks some lives are less valuable than others. His words stirred the crowd, and even many elderly residents, who had seen decades of neglect, nodded in agreement. They remembered when their own voices were strong enough to demand change, and now they were ready to do it again. Local media, once controlled by the same corrupt powers, began to pick up on these stories. Reporters traveled to the neglected neighborhoods, filming interviews with residents and capturing scenes of both despair and hope. The new evidence of racist neglect was broadcast on television screens in every home, forcing the entire city, and soon the country, to confront the ugly truth that corruption and racism had walked hand in hand for far too long. The movement sparked by the scandal soon reached the halls of government. In a heated session at City Hall, reform-minded politicians, spurred by public outcry, proposed a new safety bill. The bill promised not only to repair the broken bridges and roads, but also to allocate funds fairly across all neighborhoods, regardless of race or wealth. At a press conference held in a refurbished community center, an energetic young councilwoman named Mariah spoke with passion. This is more than a bill. It is a promise that every citizen, no matter where they live or what they look like, will be treated with dignity and respect. We are ending the era of neglect and racism in our city. Her words were met with cheers and applause, and many in the room, from school teachers to retired laborers, felt a surge of hope. However, the fight was far from over. The powerful networks that had once backed Carter were not going to disappear overnight. Rumors began to circulate that certain groups were planning to stage a counter-movement, a push to roll back the changes and restore the old order of neglect. Late at night, in back rooms and hidden online forums, discussions took place. Some called for peaceful resistance. Others whispered about more drastic measures. Marcus, Rachel, and Daniel knew that their work was not finished. They held secret meetings with community leaders and reformists, planning strategies to ensure that the new laws would be enforced and that the voices of the people could not be drowned out again. Daniel kept his fingers crossed over his laptop keyboard as he monitored online chatter, searching for any sign of a coordinated effort to undo the progress. Despite the hope and progress, there was a heavy cost. Families who had long suffered in silence now had to relive their traumas. A local church, once a beacon of strength, was filled with stories of loss and neglect. Reverend Thompson, an elderly man with a kind but tired face, spoke quietly to a small group of parishioners after a Sunday service. "We have been used as pawns for too long," he said. "Our children are elders. They have all paid the price for a system that did not care about us. Now, it is time to stand up and fight for what is right, even if it means facing more pain." In the days that followed, the city was filled with a mix of jubilation and sorrow. As news of the reform bill spread, many celebrated the promise of change. But for others, especially those who had lost loved ones due to the neglect, the celebrations were bittersweet. They knew that while the law might change, the scars left by years of racism and corruption would take much longer to heal. Marcus often walked through the neighborhoods late in the evening, talking to residents and listening to their hopes and fears. One evening, as he strolled past a row of small houses, a young girl named Tia came running up to him. "Are you really going to make things better, mister?" she asked in a small, hopeful voice. Marcus knelt down to her level and smiled gently. "I promise we will try our very best. And one day, everyone will be safe and treated fairly." Her bright eyes shone with hope, a hope that was both fragile and strong. Meanwhile, Rachel organized a community art project. She invited local children and elders to paint murals on the sides of buildings that had been tagged with graffiti and neglect. The murals told stories of the past, of pain, of loss, but also of courage and the determination to overcome injustice. One large mural, painted on the side of a community center, showed a strong tree with deep roots, its branches reaching up to the sky, with people of all colors holding hands around it. "This tree is us," Rachel explained to a group of curious onlookers. "We have grown from hard soil, and together, we can reach the light." Daniel continued his work in the background, always keeping a careful watch over the digital world. He made sure that every piece of evidence was safely stored on multiple servers and that independent journalists could access the files freely. "The truth is our shield," he would say, reminding everyone that even if someone tried to cover it up, the truth would spread like a wildfire. The movement grew stronger with each passing day. Community centers turned into hubs of activity, where residents, activists, and even reformed officials gathered to discuss their next steps. In one such meeting, held in the local library, Marcus addressed a room filled with people from all walks of life. "Today we stand together," he began, his voice steady and clear, "not just as victims of corruption, but as fighters for justice. We have seen what happens when power is abused and when racism is used to ignore the needs of the many. But we are here to say that this ends now. We will rebuild our city on a foundation of fairness, safety, and respect for every life." The room erupted in applause. Elderly residents, who had seen many promises come and go, clapped with cautious optimism. Young people, full of energy and ideas, raised their hands with determined faces. Even those who had once doubted the possibility of change now felt a sense of unity and purpose. Outside, protests continued peacefully, and the reform bill slowly made its way through the city council. The new law promised strict oversight of public works, regular independent safety inspections, and equal funding for all neighborhoods. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction, a promise that the days of racist neglect would be numbered. Yet, as the celebrations and progress continued, Marcus knew that the journey was far from complete. The powerful networks of old were still trying to find cracks in the new system. In hushed conversations at night, there were warnings of further retaliation. But with every challenge, the community grew stronger and more united. One early morning, as the first light of dawn touched the city, Marcus stood on a hill overlooking the neighborhoods he had come to know so well. The sky was painted with soft pinks and golds, and for a moment, the city looked peaceful, a gentle promise of a new beginning. He remembered all the faces he had met, the elderly woman who cried for the lost years, the children who had never known safety, and the young activists who had found their courage. He thought of the work still to be done. "We have come so far," he murmured. "But the road ahead is long." The voices of the unheard now joined his own, each one a reminder that every life mattered. He recalled the words of Reverend Thompson, the cheers of the protesters, and the determined eyes of community leaders. Their strength was a beacon that would guide him and his friends in the days to come. Inside the safe house, Rachel and Daniel were busy preparing for the next phase. Daniel was setting up additional backups for the files, ensuring that no matter what, the evidence would survive. Rachel was compiling stories and interviews from the community, planning a series of documentaries to tell the truth in their own words. Together, they were building a legacy, not just of exposing corruption, but of healing wounds and empowering the people. The reform bill was set to be voted on in the coming weeks. As community members gathered in town halls and local meeting places, a sense of cautious optimism filled the air. There was hope that the changes would bring real safety and fairness to every street, every school, every bridge in the city. And though the scars of the past would take time to fade, the united voices of the people promised a future where racism and neglect would no longer decide who was safe and who was forgotten. Marcus looked into the horizon and whispered, "This is our fight, and we will not stop until every voice is heard." His words echoed through the quiet morning, a soft pledge of resilience and hope. The aftermath of the scandal had changed the city in ways that were both painful and hopeful. The corruption had been exposed, and the racist neglect that had hurt so many was now under scrutiny. Yet, every victory came with new challenges. Powerful forces still lurked in the shadows, and the path to lasting change was fraught with obstacles. But as the people came together, young and old, rich and poor of every color, they began to build a future that honored every life. They knew that the fight for justice was a long one, and that the battle against racism and neglect was far from over. Still, in the warm glow of community meetings, in the determined faces of protesters, and in the gentle smiles of children playing safely on new, well-lit streets, there was a promise of better days. Marcus, Rachel, and Daniel continued their work, always aware of the risks but fueled by the strength of a united people. Their story, once marked by danger and betrayal, was now also a story of resilience. A story where the truth, once hidden by racism and corruption, shone brightly for all to see. As the city began to heal, the echoes of the past served as a reminder. Never again would a community be ignored, and no one's life would be considered less important because of the color of their skin. The day was breaking, and with it came the promise of a new, fairer world.